We know that impulsivity is a symptom of ADHD, but how specifically do you see impulsivity impacting us in sexuality and intimacy in the bedroom?
Impulsivity is basically like it's leaping without looking. Sex is pretty high stim, right? It's easy to get caught up in it and then just leap a little bit further. And then afterwards, it doesn't feel the same way.
That's Dr. Ari Tuckman, psychologist, understood expert, and friend of the podcast. Today, we're talking about impulsivity and sex. If you've ever impulsively said yes to sex and then maybe regretted it a little bit the next day, this episode is for you. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sorry I Missed This, the show where we talk about ADHD and its impact on all things relationship, intimacy, communication, sex, and more. Today, we're talking about impulsivity and sex. Impulsivity is a symptom of ADHD, and it's really easy to bring it into the bedroom as well. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the difference between shame and embarrassment, how you might be able to slow down and learn from your past decisions, and how to unpack complicated feelings after the fact when it comes to sex and intimacy. I don't know about you, dear listener, but I have had some regrettable experiences in my day. And one of the things that brought me into my curiosity around neurodivergency and sex and intimacy was these conversations about consent and regret and saying yes when maybe I should have actually said no. Those moments of regret, those moments of shame, those moments of embarrassment, those have really informed how I think about sex and how I navigate intimacy, even today. And so I really wanted to be honest. I really wanted to talk about kind of the elephant in the room, which is that sometimes we do say yes when we mean no. Sometimes we do impulsively say yes to a bad hookup, and that can have profound impacts on our life, much more than just the night that it happens, right? And so I'm really excited about this episode, not only because we are kind of talking about something that can be a little taboo and a little uncomfortable, but we are talking about it through the lens of ADHD and how ADHD can make things so much more complicated. And so I'm excited to welcome Dr. Ari Tuckman back to the show to have this fabulous conversation. Hi, Ari.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it so much.
Of course.
So, Dr. Tuckman, we're talking about kind of a complex topic today because we're going to be talking about safe decisions around sex. We're going to be talking about impulsivity around sex and how ADHD can impact and affect our decision-making abilities around sex. But right off the bat, I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is how do we have this conversation in a way where we aren't casting judgment, where we're really checking our own internal biases? And I know that like in my training as a certified sex educator, we do a lot of reflection on our own attitudes towards sex and stuff. Do you have any like advice just sort of like going into the conversation?
I mean, look, life is hard. Sex is complicated. Things get messy. People make decisions that they feel one way in the moment and they feel a different way afterwards. I guess you could live in the basement and do nothing, right? I guess that's the path of safety. But I think most of us would aspire to greater than that. So look, you will make mistakes. You will do things that you feel differently afterwards. People around you will also do that. Hopefully none of it is with malicious intent. It's just a bad idea.
Something that I find really interesting when we're talking about sex and intimacy is that there's often a stigma attached. And the stigma doesn't necessarily even come from, oh, we're talking about sex, how salacious, but it's from the beliefs and the things that have informed us as we grow up. So like for me, for example, I have like a very like conservative religious upbringing. And so there were certain ideals that I was taught about sex and intimacy coming from those worlds. And so when we're discussing sex and intimacy, we're not just talking about sex. We're talking about a whole collection of cultural ideas and beliefs and what we've been socialized to believe. And do you think dealing with that and then also dealing with ADHD makes that more challenging?
It absolutely does, right? And I think that, for any of us, even if we didn't have as conservative an upbringing as you did, there's still a lot of messy messages that we have in our head. And as like a wise person sitting calmly in this moment, you could say like, well, I have these beliefs about sex, and I truly do. And also in the back of my mind, in dark moments, there's still like weird thoughts, like they sort of creep in.
Yeah.
And I think when you add in that sort of impulsivity piece, it can even more creep in, right? Like you do something in the sort of the spur of the moment, and as much as anybody might be like, "Ooh, I'm a little embarrassed that wasn't good," right? It's easy to sort of hammer on yourself if you've had a lot of those moments and a lot of judgment thrown your way, and it just sets on fire all that like old baggage back there.
Yeah. You don't want a fire in the baggage compartment. That gets
Nope.
dangerous very quickly.
Yeah,
That was
exactly.
the funniest joke I've ever made. Let's back it up a little bit. Let's start at the very beginning. So we know that impulsivity is a symptom of ADHD. So, and we
Mhm.
know that, I can think of a million ways impulsivity impacts my own life, right? There's like interrupting people, difficulty processing emotions, all of that stuff. But how specifically do you see impulsivity impacting us in sexuality, in intimacy, in the bedroom?
Impulsivity is basically like it's leaping without looking, right? It's acting without pausing. Ding, hold on a sec. Let me think about this. It's easy enough in, let's just say, more boring scenarios, but like sex is pretty high stim, right? Like
Hmm.
presumably, hopefully. So it's that much easier to be caught up in the moment and caught up in what feels good and is exciting or is maybe a little bit risky, which is also exciting, at least up to a point, right? And it's easy to get caught up in it and then just leap a little bit further,
Hmm.
like just
Yeah.
in that moment, this feels right, here we go. And then again, afterwards, it doesn't feel the same way.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I got really interested in the intersection of ADHD and intimacy and relationships is because of the conversations around consent.
Mhm.
Because I think consent is obviously of the utmost importance, but consent can be difficult, much more difficult to navigate when you are also balancing emotional dysregulation, when you are balancing impulsivity, when you're balancing hyperactivity. Can you talk a little bit about like what you have learned in your research on this?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, consent is so nuanced. I mean, you know this, right? It's not just like, am I, I would like to kiss you. Do you consent to me? Like it is so much more than that. And
Yeah.
I think that where it's hard is that none of us are perfect, right? And it's sort of like if someone's drunk and under the influence and not really able to make kind of rational decisions, right? We would say like, wow, okay, their consent is impaired, so like the other person, I think, has a greater responsibility to not, even if they're saying yes, it's not a true yes,
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly.
And in a similar way, I mean, I don't know what the unintended consequences of what I'm going to say next are. I guess we'll find out. Is
Listen, I know exactly what you're going to say. And it's the
yeah,
same thing that I struggle with too when we're talking about this, but please go ahead.
yeah, okay. So I'm going to jump right in the trap. But so like, if you get caught up in that kind of ADHD impulsivity and you leap into something, you're like, yes, I'm in. Let's do this, my friend. And then the other person's like, okay, cool. They said yes, right? Like, but I don't know. Are they 100% in a, rational mind, reasonable decision making position? Like, I mean, not that any of us maybe ever are.
It's incredibly nuanced. And then on top of that, there is the added component of rejection sensitivity. There is the
Mhm.
added component of emotional dysregulation. And one of the things that I say all the time, like when I'm teaching workshops around the country, I say that if you can't say no, then you cannot give an informed yes.
Yes.
And I watch people's brains explode when I say that. And I'm like, and they're like, oh, but like, I don't want them to be mad at me, or I don't want them to think that I'm a buzzkill, or, XYZ, rejection, sensitivity, informed
Yeah.
thought here. But it feels kind of in that same vein of that if you are acting from a place of impulsivity, if you are acting from a place of getting the dopamine, it's not necessarily the same thing as healthy consent.
Hmm.
But then again, it's that trap of logically, are you saying that like no person with ADHD can give consent? And that's of course not what we're saying.
Right.
But
Right.
how do
Exactly.
you, the internet has killed nuance. And so it's like, how do you have that conversation? How do you teach those skills without inadvertently infantilizing or being super ableist around these challenges. And I don't necessarily know that I have an answer. I think the only thing we can do is really have conversations like this where they're maybe imperfect, they maybe are difficult. What do you do? Like, how do you even begin to sort of broach that challenge of informed consent versus the excitement of saying yes?
Maybe one way I might think of this is if you're doing something with somebody you know and someone you've done something with before, then like I do think the other person has some responsibility. Like if you have knowledge that the person you're doing something with has a tendency to sort of leap ahead and then feel differently about it afterwards, you're not their mom. It's not your job to make sure they don't, do problematic things or do things that they will feel bad about after. But you are responsible for your happiness and doing something that you're going to feel a little icky about afterwards. Like, I mean, sure, they said yes, but also I know how this ends, whether it's sex or like, do you want to split French fries? But there might be an extra wrinkle if you know that the person you're doing stuff with is more likely to feel differently about it afterwards.
Or knowing that about yourself. Like, so many times on this podcast, we sort of come to the earth-shattering conclusion that the best way to support ADHD is to really know yourself and understand your needs. And I know, just speaking from experience, like I have been that person. I have been that person who's like, yes, let's try that like cool, spicy new thing. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I said yes to that. I feel weird. And now like the relationship dynamic feels funny, And so, but what I had to do is there really has to be that element of self-awareness. There has to be that knowledge of, hey, sometimes I enthusiastically say yes to something and then afterwards I'm like, oh wait, maybe that wasn't good for my back, or like maybe that wasn't a healthy choice for me to make. And so I agree. Like I think that it's a two-person thing, right? Because it shouldn't be your partner's job to balance that for you. But if you are the partner of someone and you recognize that, then sometimes that extra like, hey, are you sure? Or remember you can say no, or like, just like those little moments, those can help. So something that I want to name directly that I feel like doesn't get talked about a lot is that sometimes we just have regrettable sex. Sometimes it's just a bad hookup, or the vibes are off, or somebody's in a bad mood, or somebody throws out their back or whatever, and it's just bad. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, God damn, gross,
Right.
How do we navigate the regret that comes from an actually bad, actually maybe not that great sexual encounter? Not obviously sexual assault, sexual violence, that's a completely different conversation. But I'm talking about just the like, everybody was on board, everybody was consenting, but the sex kind of sucked and now I feel a little bit grungy about it. How do we navigate through those moments?
I mean, I think some of it is like, okay, wait, what are the lessons learned? Looking back with the wisdom of hindsight, like what did I not pay attention to that I should have? Or how did I set myself up so it was just too damn hard to pull it back in? So maybe some of it is that. And I think some of it is, it's that compassion for yourself of like, look, this is a thing that's going to happen sometimes. Not everything works out great. And I don't know, I don't want to say the cost of admission, but this is sort of the cost of admission, right? Of like, if to have a lot of great sex, sometimes it isn't,
Yeah.
And
you gotta
again,
get those reps in.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I've had a few, like, I remember some of the terrible hookups that I had in college, and it's like, I remember the feeling of like, ugh, and I was like, well, we did learn a couple of valuable lessons about what I like, what I like and what I don't like. And at the very least, I've gathered some data. And I've started thinking about a lot of things as gathering data. It's not failure. It's not success. It's not winning. It's not losing. It's just, I'm gathering data so I can move forward into like this new version of myself that I'm constantly working on, which I don't know. I found that surprisingly helpful, even around like intimacy. Even when I'm like, oh, that kink scene didn't go so well or whatever, I'm like, well, it was data. I know what I don't like now, and that's handy.
Well, and especially when you're young. I mean, but even, like, hopefully you keep learning throughout your life. But like, we get good at things by doing them, right? So like, to get good at hookups, you're going to have some bad hookups, right? Like it's just, I mean, hell, it's like, you're bad at making bread the first times until you get better at it, right? Like, it's like anything,
Yeah.
don't do the things that are, like definitely a bad idea. Like, don't put yourself into that position. But yeah, I mean, it's just that accepting of like, yep, okay, definitely not doing that again. Learn something the hard way. I might as well get some benefit of wisdom from it.
And then the sort of follow-up question is the opposite but equal reaction of, oh my God, that was the best night that I have ever had. I went full werewolf. I was totally like goddess incarnate. But now it's the next day and like the sunshine has like worn off. The sparkle is worn off.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit like, oh man, I showed you a part of myself that I'm not used to showing somebody. And now I'm feeling a little self-conscious. I'm feeling a little vulnerable. I'm feeling a little bit embarrassed. And that can get translated into regret.
Yeah.
How can we maybe interrupt that process and say, actually, again, that was data. Actually, that was a moment of, I really embraced myself there. I really did something vulnerable and honest there. How do we work on that mindset?
So I love that you said it can get translated into regret, because it can, right? And that becomes a whole messy situation. But, I think it's about compassion, and it's about recognizing like I am multifaceted, hopefully, right? And there's parts of myself I don't bring, to the supermarket, let's say. But, in this moment, I did bring that. It kind of reminds me, Tammy Nelson, who's a sex therapist and author, presenter, whatever, has a line where she says, great sex will leave you feeling a little bit embarrassed afterwards, right? Because like you brought a part of yourself to that moment that you don't usually bring to the rest of your life. And, like you can feel bad about yourself. I suppose, right? That is an option, but I would propose instead that you just say like, yeah, that is a part of myself. And sometimes under the right circumstances, this comes out. You could feel embarrassed of like, ooh, I did this in front of this other person. Or I don't know, you could be like a total diva and just say like,
You're welcome.
Like, that bitch is lucky they saw this. They should count themselves, fortunate that they were able to witness this.
Behold me in my majesty.
Exactly.
No, I love that. That's why I call it werewolfing, because it's like there's like this part of you and you're like, oh no, yeah, no, it's been there the whole time. Full moon, baby, let's go.
Right.
One of the things that we see a lot in the research and the statistics around people with impulsivity around sex and ADHD is that there's a lot of emphasis on hookup culture. There's a lot of emphasis on like the dating apps and that kind of stuff. And so, hold on, I wrote down actual facts. People with ADHD have a higher number of sexual partners. They're having sex younger. They're having more frequent casual sex. They're at a higher risk for like STIs and pregnancy, that kind of thing. And so I think there's like one half of this conversation that is like, if you know this person and you're in a stable long-term relationship and you've gotten to know each other and you know that thing. But then there's also the how do we keep ourselves safe if we recognize that we are people with ADHD who are acting impulsively around sex, but we don't necessarily know the person every time, because that's also a reality. And I don't want to judge that reality. That's a reality that is real,
Yeah. And absolutely. I mean, there's no judgment in this. Like it is not for you and I to decide how other people should feel about what they do.
Yeah.
So, so it's one of those things of kind of being aware of the situations you're putting yourself into. And I think for all of us, like we will all make better choices when temptations are farther away. Right. And the example I always give is if you have a plate of chocolate chip cookies, fresh baked out of the oven, sitting in front of you, it takes a million times more self-restraint to not eat them. Right. But, and it's that old thing, right? If you don't want to drink, don't go to the bar, whatever. Like the further away you are, the easier it is to do it. So when it comes to hookup culture, then I think it's a matter of being in the ways that you can a little bit smarter about it, about like who you swipe and where you meet people and did you have anything to drink or smoke before? And, just like these little sort of speed bumps or these little things that put you a little bit, it takes a little bit more time to do something.
Yeah.
And then maybe you're more likely to sort of feel better about it afterwards. And also part of it, again, back to the not living in the basement, is like there may be some times where it doesn't work out, right? It's like you go to the new restaurant, you're like, oh, that actually kind of sucked, not going there again.
There is absolutely a learning process. Like I've definitely had experiences where I was like, well, I've made that mistake and it was hard for me to make that mistake, but I've made it and I shall not make it again. But, ideally we want to set people up for success. And so something that I'm curious about is the relationship between emotional dysregulation and impulsivity, because they're similar, but they're not the same, but they also like really interplay with each other.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that they can go both ways. I mean, one is if you're impulsive and you put yourself into a difficult situation, that makes it harder to regulate your emotions. But also, maybe more to the point, the stronger you feel your emotions, the more likely you are to act on them. And the more kind of worked up we are, probably the less, I'll just say, wise our words and actions will tend to be.
I also see a real relationship between being emotionally dysregulated and impulsively lashing out. And like lashing out doesn't have to be in anger. It can also be a search for connection, a need from like getting something from another person. And sometimes, especially when we're talking about intimacy, that can look like validation, that can look like tenderness, that can look like sexual intimacy. And sometimes those sort of like needs that we're getting, we're using those to sort of self-soothe that emotional dysregulation. And so rather than the regulation coming internally, we're saying, hey, have sex with me so I can emotionally regulate. And that's really common in ADHDers, right?
Yeah. Or the other way, I will have sex with you to self-regulate, maybe because I'm worried about your response, or you seem upset, or I'm worried that you could be upset if I say, actually, I'm not interested right now.
Yeah. Oh my God. The people pleasing element and the rejection sensitivity element of consent. Like, I think I could spend the next 50 years of my life talking about nothing but that. And I'm like, maybe I would change the world a little bit, because it's so dangerous. It's so toxic, that idea of I'm going to do this thing that I don't want to do. I'm going to endure. Like Betty Martin talks a lot about enduring. I'm going to suffer through this because I don't want to say something. And I'm like, that's not consent. That's not authentic intimacy. That's so unhealthy. But I also don't want to judge, and I don't want to tell people they're doing it wrong.
I think it's not about telling them they're doing it wrong. I think it's expressing care, right?
Yeah.
I am concerned for you that if you continue to do this thing, it doesn't work for you, right?
Yeah.
It's not us judging it. We don't have that authority, but rather like I don't think you are setting yourself up for good feelings.
Yeah. Actually, that's a perfect segue to the next question that I have. So let's talk about bad feelings, right? And specifically, I want to talk a little bit about shame and about embarrassment, because they're two different things. Can you help us understand the difference between shame and embarrassment?
Absolutely. They overlap sort of, they look alike, but they're not the same thing, right? Shame is it's an internal feeling, right? It's that feeling of there is something wrong with me, like I am somehow defective, right? And that is a feeling one has about oneself. Embarrassment is more about I feel badly, or I'm worried about what other people might think of me. Right. So it might be I'm completely fine with what I'm doing, but I know you're going to be judgy. So I don't want to, tell you about it, or I don't want you to find out.
Yeah.
Or it could be, ooh, I actually don't feel so good about what I'm doing. Right. I have my own shame about it. And you finding out is now even more mortifying. And now I'm embarrassed that others know. And where it gets a little bit more complicated is it might be a thing that within yourself, you're like, you know what, I feel okay about this, right? As in like, I'm okay with being into BDSM, or with, having an open relationship, or whatever kind of, kinky stuff you like to do. But also you may not want like, I don't know, your grandma and your neighbors to know that you're into it also. So like, you could be embarrassed about others knowing, and also totally fine with it within yourself.
It's like Shrek. There's layers. And I love that you brought kink and BDSM to the conversation, because obviously that's like such a special interest of mine. But I see that so much, especially in people who are sort of finding their way to kink is a lot of times there's a deep internalized shame. Like there's something wrong with me for wanting this, or I'm like this disgusting weirdo pervert. I can't believe I'm into this. Oh, I'm so gross. And there's like this self-punishment and the self-hatred that grows out of those desires. Whereas like the embarrassment of like, yeah, like I like this like weird thing. And like, you know, you don't have to talk about it on the internet, dear listener. But I think really being able to suss those out and really being able to tell the difference, that's also a really great way, I think, to couch some of that emotional dysregulation and the rejection sensitivity that so many people experience.
I think there's also like the impulsivity part of this is, you know, you may do something that then somehow other people find out about, right? You did something in public or somebody talks or God forbid someone sends pictures and videos or whatever. You know, it might be that other people then, let's just say, have some thoughts and feelings about it, right? And I think on the one hand, that kind of rejection sensitivity can make it easy then to go to shame, right? As in like, ooh, I did something bad. What is wrong with me that I would do this? But I think it's important to kind of separate out. Is this other person expressing concern for you as in like, I'm concerned you did a thing that will be bad for you, as in like, wait, you had unprotected sex, or like, wait, you let somebody film you and they put it up on the internet, that could come back and bite you, right? They're expressing concern for you. Or is it a thing that they feel uncomfortable about what you did, right? It's not their thing, or there's something that makes them feel awkward about it. And they're projecting that onto you, as in, how could you, you know, this can't possibly be good for you. And you're like, no, actually it is. This is awesome. Please, can I have more of it? You know, so being able to separate that out.
Something that has really been on my mind lately, especially around conversations around like consent and impulsivity and stuff, is curiosity and how important being curious is. It's easy to judge somebody who might go to like their local kink space or whatever. If you're not curious, about what is it about that thing? What is it about kink or whatever that inspires you, that you are drawn to? And I feel like, especially in conversations around sex and intimacy, curiosity is such a gift that we can give our partners. We can take away that embarrassment if we're just curious. Like, tell me more about that. Like, what is it? Like, what draws you to that?
I will bring this right back to impulsivity. Check this out.
Okay,
so,
bring it back home.
Curiosity is effortful. Judgment is easy. That's weird. That sucks. That's evil. Bad. Right? Done. No thinking required. But curiosity takes real effort, as in like, I need to cognitively stretch myself to try to understand what you're saying. And I need to emotionally stretch myself to like stay present and not get overwhelmed with any strong feelings that are hard to manage. Right. So, and I think I would kind of take the same perspective then, like, or I would, you know, encourage curiosity for when it comes to impulsive behaviors, right? And both curious of like, okay, how might I shoot myself in the foot here? But also afterwards of like my own impulsivity or your impulsivity of like, you know, you did a thing and now here we are. But like being curious about it, of like, okay, so wait a second. So what happened there? Like, why did this come to be? What was it about the situation that I leapt rather than pausing to look? What does this tell us? Or does this really just not tell us actually anything? And let's not overread it. But, you know, kind of like, are there lessons to be learned here? And rather than just spiraling into either one's own shame or judgment of the other.
Yeah. And that also feels like a really good toolkit for rejection sensitivity as a whole. The idea of getting curious instead of the automatic judgment of like, I'm a bad person, I am being rejected, they're going to hate me forever. The curiosity of, you know, what if I handled this differently? Or what is my fear of rejection telling me in this moment? Like that to me starts looking like a really effective toolkit, not just around intimacy.
Yeah, I can't top that. That's great. But yeah, absolutely, right? It's about being open to it, thinking about it, and not jumping to conclusions about it.
So, Ari, we've talked a lot about impulsivity. We've talked a lot about how it can impact the going in, the making the decision. But I'm curious about afterwards and how we differentiate between the real truth that sometimes stuff is going to go wrong, sometimes stuff is going to be bad, but sometimes it's totally fine, but we're telling ourselves that sort of embarrassment, rejection, sensitivity story.
Well, it's sort of this idea of like, at my core, how do I feel about this? Versus, is there a part of me that understands society and it is telling me, like other people in my life are telling me I should feel bad about this? You know what I mean? Like, because I think that's kind of the thing of it, right? Is like, do I actually feel bad or do I just know that I am supposed to or something?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think some of it is that. And I think there's also another part of like, that you can feel both more than one way about it, right? Part of me feels like this about it. And also there's a part of me that kind of feels like this about it. I'm not entirely like resolved to it, but sometimes life isn't fully resolved.
It is such a powerful thing to take joyful ownership of your pleasure. It is, you know, because we so often get told that wanting pleasure or needing pleasure is something to be judged, something to be embarrassed about, something that can be shameful. But in reality, I think if it feels good and you're having a good time, it is okay to be 100% okay with that.
But I think there's something to that of like allowing yourself to feel it, allowing yourself to sort of deserve it, I guess. And to not sort of talk it down afterwards or feel guilty about like, oh, that was too much or I was too much or I shouldn't have this or whatever. And I don't know, maybe it's fine. I mean, anybody lose any fingers or toes, right? Like maybe it was fine.
Ari Tuckman, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a fun episode. Thank you for being willing to have these interesting and spicy conversations with me. I certainly appreciate it. And dear listener, thanks for being here. End of episode. I'm so good at the closers. You have no idea.
Right. Straight to tape. Just bam, send it out.